Does that remind anybody of World War I and World War II? Yes, it does, because it's the same shit all over again. So that's what you mentioned about the Black Rock German Central. That's where he fits in. That's where this Anglo-German treaty, we can tell it, fits in. That's where the militarization of Rotterdam port fits in. That's where the 1 trillion euro budget for NATO fits in. And that's where this interconnection of interests will keep. And don't forget, very important, the European Union machinery and the European Commission machinery, which is run by you know who, those two harpies, the toxic Medusa and the Estonian batshit crazy, undefinable leader of the foreign policy of 450 million European citizens, voters, taxpayers. So it's all coming together, and it's already coming together now. So if now we already know and we can identify the players, we can identify where the money is coming from and where the money is going to and all that, of course, the Russians know this much better than any of us. So the Russians are preparing themselves for this war. It's not what's going on in Ukraine now. This is the starter. The Russians are managing the starter at the moment, the Russian way, as we all know. If you understand the Russian mentality, you know that this is the way that they do wars. Attrition, little by little. It's not about conquering territory. If Trump doesn't know anything about foreign policy anywhere in the global south, he still doesn't know what BRICS is. Can I give you probably the best quote of these past few days? I'm going to quote Trump verbatim, starting now. When I heard about this group from BRICS, so it's a group from BRICS. It's not the BRICS group. 6 countries, basically. So he doesn't even know how many are BRICS and BRICS partners. I hit them very hard. And if they ever really form in a meaningful way, so according to Trump, BRICS is not even formed. It will end very quickly, I'll tell you. They won't be gone very long. I don't think they'll even do it. Do it means, in his mind, in his mind, the only thing that registers is this group of 6 or whatever, unformed, blah, 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 is de-dollarizing, and this is anti-American. This is the only thing that registers in Trump's mind. I don't think they'll even do it. They're virtually afraid to me. And he didn't even construct the phrase correctly. It would be, they're virtually afraid of me. He said, they're virtually afraid to me. So to him, personally, all of the BRICS are afraid. So this is how he sees. It's very telling because as much as it's horribly constructed, a 5-year-old will construct this train of thought better than Trump. But it's all there. It proves that he has absolutely no clue what BRICS is all about. What is being formed is something like this, but it's not there yet, which should be for a while now. This is a counter-terrorist operation. The problem is, if you get the heads of the terrorist snake, who's going to be next? And that explains why the Russians are still refraining from Oreshniking Bankova in Kiev. Okay, who's going to be next? And we don't want Zaluzhny. Zaluzhny is the Brits' man, and Britain is officially at war against Russia. Whichever way you try to describe it. London is at war with Moscow. So all these variables are playing every day, but we already know the long picture, what's going to be. This NATO war against Russia in 5 years, roughly. So the Russians have to calculate everything towards, okay, what's going to happen within these next 5 years? And the gradualist approach coming to the point when NATO finally declares war on Russia, Russia can destroy all major NATO basic nodes in half an hour, which they can. Obviously, those idiots, this idiot generals in the UK, reformed or retired or otherwise, they have no clue about that. But Russia can destroy everything, including this military burst at Rotterdam airport with a few Sarmat, Zircon, and Oreshniks. So the Russians are looking at that when we get to that point. The point is much, much bigger. The war against BRICS now is getting to the next level. This is something we had been discussing for quite a while, writing about it, debating among us, our small group of analysts. And we knew that sooner or later we'll go to the next level. And in some cases, hot, like it did with Iran, like practically a declaration of war, that the Iranians, of course, as you know very well, Nima, Persians and Iranians, they think very long term, historically minded. So they calibrated their response, or in the case of the attack by the US, they did not respond, because then it would be all out war. It's not in the interests of Iran of doing that. In the case of Russia, of course, the circus ringmaster and the people around him, his donors, the real people running the show, the American ruling classes, they found out, of course, they found out what they already knew, that you cannot make Russia bend over, whatever you do. So they're back to threats once again. This stupid threat of 50 days, 100% tariffs, 500% tariffs, 1,000,000% tariffs. Nobody pays attention to this stupidity anymore. But it's the language of threats, bluster, of course, all mixed with hubris all the time. And the Russians, as you know very well, and our audience knows very well, they are realists. It's not an accident that the current Secretary General is Dutch Rutte, former Prime Minister of the Netherlands. Not an accident at all. He is one of those young global leaders. I'm sure many of you in our audience know about this. This is a Davos institution, a World Economic Forum institution, scam for a long time, which is basically forming, indoctrinating, financing, giving diplomatic support to young global leaders of the future. Guess who was one of them years ago? Mark Rutte from the Netherlands. So this is very dangerous because it aligned with the projected military budget of NATO. In fact, it's not only for 2030, it could start from next year. 1 trillion euros a year, which they don't have, by the way. They're going to have to extract this from civil populations across Europe, European taxpayers, in other words, right? 1 trillion euros a year, and it will be on and going up. Essentially to do what? To buy American weapons. To do what? Prepare the war against Russia. And who profits from all this? Twice. The Americans arm the Europeans, and the American industrial military complex makes a lot of money out of this toothless chihuahuas. They are going to organize and prepare the war against Russia. And the US is leading from behind, but far away, protected by the Atlantic Ocean. It's the self-confidence of becoming an economic superpower and a technological superpower. My last trip to Shanghai, I was like, wow, you are hit in the face everywhere you look and everybody you talk to. I plan to go back. I'll be back this second semester. I'll be between Russia and China, more or less. And I want to get deeper. Absolutely. I want to go back to Xinjiang and look at Xinjiang from a technological point of view. Nobody in the West has a clue about it. So it's no wonder. It's no wonder. And talking to first-class Chinese academics, like we had the chance to do it during the summit in Rio, it's visible. The quality of the analysis is excellent, of course. And this sense of self-confidence. And yes, finally, China, we are not dictating, but we are not imposing, not dictating, but we are tracking our development and global international insertion the way we want, with no interference whatsoever. This is the sign of a sovereign power, a real sovereign power. Iran can do the same thing, but the constraints over Iran are much hardcore now. And Iran is surrounded by the enemy. It's a different story. And Iran is not an economic superpower. It has, I would say, the potential. It's all there. When I was traveling the north-south economic corridor, you can feel it. From the Caspian to the Persian Gulf, you can see, wow, you can see the potential of the country. But at the same time, we have this pressure from the discombobulated American system around Trump. I wouldn't say that Trump himself has already realized that, because he's not an analytical character. He's not a strategist. He's not an analytical character. He doesn't read. He doesn't listen to anybody. He only listens to 3-word mantras and all that. But he knows that the 50-day deadline is a non-starter with Russia. Russia never makes decisions under pressure, never, especially Putin. And the fact that within the next few weeks, the Russian advance will continue and even increase in pace, that the Russians are looking at the big picture in terms of not only Ukraine, but the opening up of new fronts against Russia. And that starts with Azerbaijan, where that ghastly Aliyev is playing a really hardcore double game, and everybody in positions of power in Moscow, they know that. MI6 indoctrinating more and more people all across Central Asia. That new Iron Curtain in the Baltic, the three Chihuahuas, Poland and Finland, trying to, in their own dreams, transform the Baltic into a NATO sea and isolate Russia, especially St. Petersburg, which obviously will be a no-go. But for the moment, they still think this could happen. And of course, the Black Sea, where now we have surveillance NATO planes flying all across and all over Crimea on a daily basis. They look at facts on the ground, geopolitical facts, geoeconomic facts, actual threats, physical threats against the Russian Federation. For instance, this past weekend, there were a swarm of drones launched against Moscow. Sheremetyevo Airport had long interruptions. So this is something that the Russian population, especially Moscow, where the war is so far away from Moscow, something we always discuss. The war is at least 1,200 kilometers away from Moscow. It's too far away. But when you have drones thrown against Russia and paralyzing Sheremetyevo Airport, that's another story. So if this continues, there will have to be a much harsher response from Russia. This is what many of us are characterizing as the Oreshnik moment. We're not there yet, but we're getting closer and closer to it. For the moment, we are at the expansion of the Russian offensive moment, which can last for a few weeks, a few months, can bring the whole Ukrainian front to collapse within the next few months. If you conquer territory, excellent. Demilitarization, which is working. And then long-term, which is be much more complicated, denazification. But for that, they need a new government in Kiev. They are following the machinations of the empire and the Brits. And now, especially with being openly leaked that the next leader of Ukraine is going to be Zaluzhny. We knew that a year and a half ago that it was Zaluzhny, because he left Kiev. He became ambassador of Ukraine in London, where he's being trained, I would say 10 hours a day at least, day after day, by MI6 to be their man in Kiev. Everybody knew that. It's ridiculous. Now it's in the open, because now it's even published by American mainstream media. So we all know where this is going. And obviously the Russians know better than anybody where this is going. So, brings us back to the question. India is already very close to Russia and wants to get closer with Brazil. So we still remain with the number one issue to be solved, possibly in the next few months, which is India-China. And the only ones who can solidify, finally, the relationship are the Russians. And it's in their interest and it's in BRICS' interest to solidify that. So let's see how it works. And for instance, many Chinese academics, I was listening to them say directly, which is something the Chinese always go through metaphors, images, historical analogies. In this case, they were saying the trust between China and India is lost. That's very serious. So how do you recover this trust? The only ones who can make it happen or accelerate this happening are the Russians. So let's see. The Russians will have a crucial role in this next less than year and a half. The summit in BRICS summit in India will be probably end of next year in India, to put them on the same table and say, look, we are all being attacked now by the same player. So are we going to get together for good or what? Are you in or out? So the decision is with people backing Modi, not necessarily Modi himself, but the people backing him. Johnson Hung from NVIDIA, he knows that, but he still needs to sell these chips. So obviously he pressured the Trump system, look, do something. I need to sell these chips, otherwise I'm going down. I have this huge inventory. I need to get rid of these chips. And why this happened in the first place, Nima? Because the Chinese started to impose heavy restrictions on the export of rare earth to the US. And then you hit where it hurts. You hit the American auto industry and you hit the American aerospatial industry. That's it. So and that's the difference between Russia and China and Brazil. We're getting there. We're getting to Brazil. Russia is a military nuclear superpower. You don't mess with that. There will always be responses and responses on the terrain. China is an economic superpower. You don't mess with that. The responses are geoeconomic and in trade and in exports. And the fact that China can export to anywhere they want. They don't need the American market. Brazil is a much more complicated situation because now Brazil is under all-out trade geoeconomic war. So it will depend, and it's not Lula per se, of course, it's Lula's decisions, but the Lula government. And I think you and a great deal of our audience know very well some of these people who are in positions of power in the Lula government, and they are not exactly Einsteins, are they? Once again, and this is the question of the war. When will the Russians stop? Where and how? We still don't know. And everybody that says he knows, he doesn't know what he's talking about. The only one who knows is Vladimir Putin. Maybe Zhemov maybe doesn't know. Medvedev doesn't know. The whole Supreme Council still doesn't know. The final decision is the big bear. And of course, the pressure will mount because then, okay, we crossed the Dnieper. We keep going. Yes, we keep going. All the way to Odessa. Why not? Let's go all the way to Odessa. Especially now that after Odessa, Transnistria. So, all the doors will be open, right? But at the same time, the Russians are looking at how direct attacks inside the Russian Federation are bound to increase sooner rather than later. That's where these NATO surveillance planes over Crimea, day after day, for a few weeks now, that's where they fit in. They are going to come up with something in Crimea, and it's going to be a terror attack, most probably. How is Russia going to react to that? This gradualist approach is reaching the limits, right? What our friends in Moscow, businessmen, I've been hearing from them for 2.5 years now, this almost war cannot be an almost war anymore. This transition from SMO to counter-terrorist operations, CTO, it's not announced yet. It's forming. So there will be escalations, no question, including this possible terror attack in Crimea or several terror attacks in Crimea and long-range missiles striking inside the Russian Federation. They need to provoke Russia to do something. The problem is Russia won't be provoked. Look, they were provoked with an attack on 1/3 of their nuclear strategic assets, and they did not respond accordingly. They are always postponing the response because when the real response comes, it's going to be something off the charts. And the Russians prefer that. Coup de grâce, as we say here in France, the coup that destroys your enemy for good. So it's fascinating to see, but when you understand the Russian mentality, you understand this waiting and preparing and not overreacting. And it's very hard for many of us, especially all of us who are products of the West, to understand that. But after a while, when you understand how they think, it makes sense from their point of view, totally. And the way that why this is not a war. No, it's just a military operation, a police operation. And now a police operation mixed with a counter-terrorist against a bunch of terrorists. The real war is not this one. The real war is becoming. We have to be prepared for that one. This one is easy. So that's the problem. That's the huge problem. So Brazil now is facing an existential threat. To put it on a BRICS context, Russia, China, and Iran figured out these past, I would say, three months, especially, that they are facing an existential threat individually and as BRICS members vis-a-vis the empire. And now Brazil is part of this group. India is different because India, and this is something that was heavily discussed on the sidelines of the BRICS summit in Rio, they still don't know where they are and they still don't know where they're going. And they're still hedging their bets. Brazil, to a certain extent, the Brazilian ruling classes, they don't even hedge their bets. They are Atlanticists, and many of them are fifth columnists, straight out. But now, what Trump is doing, and the system is doing, and imbeciles like Lindsey Graham are vociferating, and uber imbeciles like Tutti Frutti or Rudy, NATO Secretary General, they are threatening Brazil directly. So that's another ball game. So now Brazil now is playing in the main stakes. So that makes the situation much more complicated. We're going to have to wait for August 1st to see if these 50% tariffs will start. The Brazilian response, which under reciprocity law would be 50% back on American products. In fact, this is going to be much, much worse because it involves nuclear weapons and it involves superimposed wars that the Americans are already unleashing everywhere using their vassal NATO. And these wars are essentially against BRICS. So it's geoeconomic, geopolitical, and military. And that's why it's so dangerous. So if you have local elites, there are mostly Atlanticists, fifth columnists. They don't care about their nation and they care about their own personal profit, preferably abroad. They don't care about the local population. They only care about being accepted as lowly members of the ruling classes in the global north, the members of the BRICS members and the BRICS partners as well. We don't know how India is going to manage all that. It's too early to tell. But even the fact that India was there and Modi was in ecstasies, the way he was received in Brazil by Lula, etc., and he's proposing a strategic partnership and all that. So obviously, the Americans timed that too as a message to India as well. Oh yeah, you're dreaming of a strategic relationship with Brazil. You're going to be hit hard, just like we're hitting them hard. Trump's own words. This ends up filtering back to levels of power in the Kremlin as well. And in India, the same thing, especially the fact that India now is, in a sense, getting closer to some of the BRICS. And what the Brazilians have already started, at least, they are receiving inquiries from, especially Africa and Asia, new potential customers to these products that Brazil exports. In fact, it was not her. The guy who came up with that was Kurt Campbell. He was the number 2 at the State Department at the time. He conceptualized pivoting to Asia. And then Hillary, she said, it's my idea. It was not. She stole it. And then she published a huge piece on foreign affairs talking about pivoting to Asia. That was 2010. Absolutely. So even before 2010, the American ruling classes, the people who run the show, they're already thinking, yes, we have to concentrate over there, all across Asia. They were thinking about China, but laterally, underneath, they were also thinking about Russia. Even before Maidan, don't forget, the whole Maidan scam was an Obama administration scam, including the then Vice President and Joe Biden. So yes, I'm glad that you mentioned 2010. I remember very well. I was up and down around Asia at the time when I was with Asia Times, of course. And obviously, coming back to the US, we're always okay. What do the Americans want to do with Asia? We can manage, as they are managing, right? But you said it's getting more and more dangerous by the minute because there will be, I would say, a string of escalations from now on. There's no question about that. Especially when you have in power in NATO, in the UK, in political leaderships of different NATO nations, and in Brussels, people of this quality. And now I'm being diplomatic. They don't even qualify as having any quality. So we can expect the worst. The Russians don't want that. But if they are eventually forced to do something like this, they will go for it. But not in terms of blood. It's in terms of amputating NATO's military capability, which is the Russians could do that in less than a day, really. So that's why the problem is if the cost for the Russian civilian population starts to become very high. Don't forget, for the moment, the cost in terms of Russian casualties, it's already very high. And this is a subject that is extremely sensitive to discuss when you are in Russia. I saw that for myself, and in many episodes, I was trying to write something or publish something that I knew, oh no, this is a red line, because it would be considered an attack on national security. And I understand their motivations and I understand their logic, of course. German-UK sort of treaty, which is basically a German-UK treaty to attack Russia. But it's not the only one. There will be others. I would say from now on, there will be interlocking intra-European treaties with only a single objective: prepare the war against Russia, the hot war against Russia, which in NATO speak, in NATO internal documents that we had access to, in NATO leaks, it's going to be around 2030. And now they're openly saying, no, not openly, but almost openly saying that it's within the next 5 years. Okay, some of my notes here that I wrote, and I'm sure our audience is going to love it. I wrote my notes on a Beijing Club letterhead. It's one of my favorite new letterheads now. Very few people are paying attention to what's happening in Rotterdam, Nima, and all our audience. Rotterdam is probably Europe's biggest port, much bigger than Antwerp, in fact. It is one of the ports, if the Belt and Road was fully flowing towards Europe, in the minds of the Chinese, the number one port in the north of Europe would be Rotterdam, and in the south, Venice. Rotterdam now is fully being prepared to be also a military port. This is essential. Rotterdam is enormous, so they are setting out what will be at least 30% of the surface of Rotterdam to be NATO military installations, preparing for this war in 2030. You lose any inkling of rational thought that you may have already had in the past, and you didn't, because you launched this operation against Russia in the first place, and you were sure that you were going to win in 3 months. How stupid can these people be? They are that stupid, even more. And now it's desperation. And of course, Trump is smart enough as a businessman he found his way out already. This is not my war. This war is from the Autopan administration that came before me, and now it's your war, Europeans. You want to fight your war? Okay, buy all our weapons. That's it. I'll sell everything that you want. That's it. So the US is out, technically, right? It's a very smart way of dealing with it. And of course, he sets up the Europeans for a fall even more catastrophic than before. Each day that passes, the European fall will be even more catastrophic. And they don't see it, which is Gosh, they cannot see it. They cannot see it. They are deaf, dumb, blind, and stupid enough not to see that they are now being set up. Now that defeat is inevitable, they are being set up for anything that happens, including this famous war against Russia in 2030.